Beating the beef bacteria. There's no doubt about it, Americans like to eat beef. Americans eat about 26 billion pounds of beef per year. This averages out to about 83 pounds of beef per person per year. That's a lot of beef. But beef is one type of food that can make people very sick if it's not processed and cooked properly. A certain type of bacteria known as E. coli is why people can get sick from beef. This bacteria is naturally found in a cow's digestive system and is needed to help them digest food. But for humans, the bacteria can make you very sick. In rare cases, the bacteria can even cause death. Scientists are working to find ways to keep the beef supply in the United States safe. They have spent millions of dollars experimenting with ways to keep the dangerous bacteria out of the food supply. The answer may be a vaccine for cows. Researchers at Kansas State University and West Texas A&M University have developed a special medicine for cows. The vaccine prevents the dangerous E. coli bacteria from reproducing and leaving the animal's body. Researchers recently began giving the vaccine to beef cattle, and they hope to see a decrease in the number of E. coli cases soon. Ranching, a changing frontier. Cattle barons. After the Civil War, many people in Texas began ranching or raising cattle. These people, known as cattle barons, knew that they could raise cows on the good Texas land. They also knew that they could make a lot of money selling the cows. They built large ranches on the Texas prairies and they hired men to take care of the cattle. These men were known as cowboys and wranglers. They worked on the ranches every day and took cattle to be sold at the market. The cattle barons used the money they made to buy more cattle. They also made their ranches larger and better, and some of these ranches are still running in Texas today. Richard King, an Irish American born in New York City, bought large tracts of land in South Texas between the Nueces and Rio Grande rivers, and by using cattle drivers to get his animals to northern markets, King revolutionized ranching and made enormous profits. The King Ranch in Kingsville, Texas, has been around since Richard King started it in 1852. Today, this is the largest cattle ranch in the United States. The ranch is larger than the state of Rhode Island. Life on the ranch. Most ranches in Texas were located on plains and prairies. Usually, there were no neighbors for many miles around. Until the 1800s, ranchers kept their cattle on the grassy plains or the open range. These ranches had enough food and supplies to last for up to a year at a time. They got water from windmills that pumped water from underground wells. Most ranches had several buildings. The ranch owner usually lived in the main house. Cowboys, wranglers, and ranch cooks usually lived in a nearby bunkhouse. The owner might build different buildings or fences depending on the climate and the ranch's size. Cowboys. The work done by cowboys on the ranch was very hard. They were responsible for the daily jobs on the ranch. They were also responsible for getting the cattle ready to sell. The cowboys had to brand or mark each cow so that they knew which ones were theirs. Many ranchers bought their cattle to the markets, and each rancher had his own brand design that they burned into the hide of each of his cows. The cowboys drove or guided the cattle to railroads. From there, the cattle would be taken to a market and sold. These trips were called cattle drives. They were often long, dusty, and dangerous journeys. One famous cattle rancher and cowboy, Charles Goodnight, blazed or laid out a cattle trail with his friend Oliver Loving. The Goodnight Loving Trail stretched from Belknap, Texas to markets in New Mexico, Colorado, and Wyoming. It was used by cowboys for many years to come. Cowboys depended on their horses. These horses had to be hardworking and have great endurance. Cowboys trained their horses to keep the cattle moving along the trail safely. Texas trails. The trails of Texas were often very crowded. Sometimes the cattle even had a difficult time finding enough food on the trail. There were several trails that led from South Texas to the beef markets in Kansas, Missouri, Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. The Chisholm Trail carried 2 million cattle to Kansas from 1867 to 1871. The Goodnight Loving Trail was established in 1866, and cattle on this trail were headed to Colorado, Wyoming, and Montana. Trail drives. In order to make money, ranchers had to drive or guide the cattle down trails for hundreds and hundreds of miles. The trip was always hard work. It was sometimes boring, and many times it was dangerous. The cowboys rode near the herds of cows to keep them from wandering off. The men faced wild animals, harsh weather, and sometimes even angry American Indians. But there were two dangers that were always on the cowboys' mind. The first was running out of drinking water on the hot, dusty trail. The second was a chance of a stampede. The wild cattle might be easily scared. They might burst off, running for miles. A cowboy caught in the middle of a stampede could easily be hurt or killed. Barbed wire. At the beginning of the cattle boom, ranchers let their cattle roam anywhere they wished, but farmers did not like that animals could wander onto their land. Soon, these farmers put up barbed wire fences. They wanted to be able to grow crops without wild roaming animals destroying their fields or eating their crops. Ranchers could no longer let their cattle wander over the open range. The animals had to be kept in pens. Even though the new fencing cost money, it seemed to be a good idea. Ranchers were able to keep wild animals away from their herds, and the health of all the animals improved. The farmers' fencing, however, made it impossible to lead the cattle down the trails on drives. Ranchers now had to use nearby railroads to get their animals to the market. At the end of the trail. After only 20 years, the cattle driving business came to an end. Nobody wanted cowboys to cross their land with thousands of cattle. Many farmers and ranchers put up fences around their land to keep the cowboys away. American Indian tribes wanted to be paid for letting the cattle cross their lands, and at the same time, many cattle on the trails caught a disease called Texas fever. This disease was quickly spreading between the cattle on the trails, and many of them died. To help keep the disease from spreading, many towns did not allow cattle to pass through. Soon, the price of beef dropped. Cattle barns were no longer making huge profits. The cattle driving business ended, but the trails left their mark on Texas and America. During those 2 decades, Texas built many new ranches. People also built many new towns along the trails. Many of these communities continued to grow, and people began to think about using the railroads more to transport all kinds of goods. Although one period of history was ending, another exciting period was just beginning. Lizzie Johnson Williams, the Texas Cattle Queen. Lizzie Johnson was born in Missouri in 1845. She moved to Austin, Texas with her parents when she was a very young girl. Lizzie was very well educated. She studied at Chapel Hill College in Georgetown, Texas, and became a teacher and a writer. Everyone always noticed how elegant she looked in her diamond jewelry and fancy clothing. During the Civil War, Lizzie took over her older brother's job while he fought in the Confederate Army. Lizzie worked for cattle barons, and her job was to do the math and keep up with the money for the trail drives. Lizzie was smart and learned a lot during this time. She began buying her own land and cattle and made money for herself. Even after she married and became Lizzie Williams, she always kept track of her own money. Lizzie earned the nickname the Texas Cattle Queen during the last days of the trail drives. Unlike most women of the day, Lizzie went with her cattle on the trail drives to market. Some people used to joke that she wanted to protect her investment all the way to the bank. After the days of cattle driving ended, Lizzie stayed in the cattle industry. She and her husband even owned a very large ranch in Cuba. After her death in 1924, Lizzie's family found a small fortune in jewels, fabrics, and cash in her home. Today, Lizzie Johnson Williams is remembered as one of the most important women in Texas history for helping women blaze the trail in the cattle industry. Joseph Gilden and his invention that changed the West. During the long, cold winter of 1872 in Delco, Illinois, Lucinda Gilden noticed something strange. The large wire hairpins she kept in a glass dish on her dresser were disappearing. Lucinda asked her daughter about the missing pins. Elva Francis did not know anything about the mystery. Day after day, the hairpins continued to disappear. One evening, Lucinda was sitting at the dinner table with her husband Joseph when the mystery was suddenly solved. Joseph took two hairpins from his shirt pocket and began bending and twisting them. Lucinda wanted to know what in the world her husband was doing with her pins. Joseph calmly explained that he had an idea to build a new type of fence. Lucinda was excited. She had complained all last spring and summer when the livestock from their farm got into her yard and had crushed her plants. Joseph worked on his idea all winter long. He tried many different designs, and finally, Joseph and a blacksmith friend found a way to wrap short pieces of thorny wire around a longer piece of wire. The pointed barbs would keep animals out, in or out of a fenced area. The points would push against the animals and force them away from the fence. Gilda made the wire himself at first. He used one horse to help him move the equipment he needed for making the wire. He even began using fencing material at his own home to show people how well it worked. Within 2 years, people all over knew about Joseph Gilden's amazing new fencing material. Gilden opened a large manufacturing plant to make the material, and soon he and his family became very wealthy. Now farmers on the plains and prairies of America had a new type of fencing material, barbed wire. That changed the ways they lived and worked. By the mid-1870s, farmers and ranchers in Texas disagreed about whether cattle should be allowed to roam on the open range. Many farmers thought their crops would do better if cattle were kept in pens so they could not eat the plants. Some ranchers believed the cattle should not be allowed to graze and eat anywhere they could find food. The two groups had to work together to solve their problem. They had to work as good citizens. Good citizens can use a process to help find solutions or answers to problems. Use the process steps below and information from this issue to identify ways that the fencing and roaming problem of the Texas open range could have been solved. First, identify the problem. What was the problem that the Texas farmers and ranchers faced? Second, gather information. Get all the facts. List 3 facts about the problem in Texas. Think about all the options. What were all the possible ways the problem could have been solved? Think about options both ranchers and farmers might have suggested. List them. Consider each option. What were the good and bad things about every possible solution? Write a sentence about each idea. Choose a solution. What solution did farmers and ranchers finally agree on? Explain that solution below and think about the results. Did the plan work? Do you think the farmers and ranchers thought about changing the plan? What could they have done differently? Explain.